Welcome friends to the Secret Doctrine webinar. Today we are going to start with a series of classes online in which we are going to explore the Secret Doctrine, one of the most important books, if not the most important, that we have in the Theosophical movement. This book was written by Madame Blavatsky, and the Secret Doctrine is based on a series of stanzas that, according to Blavatsky, were copied and translated by her from some books that are not available to most people in humanity, some secret books. This book in particular is called the Book of Xian. Xian means meditation, is probably a phonetic spelling, Tibetan spelling of the word dhyana, the Sanskrit dhyana, that means meditation. In this first series of 6 classes, we are going to explore the first 3 stanzas in volume 1. There are 2 volumes in the Secret Doctrine. Volume 1 is the part of the Secret Doctrine that describes the manifestation of the universe, the manifestation and evolution of the cosmos, and more particularly our planet. And then in future series we are going to keep on exploring some different stanzas from this volume. So in this one, in the first one, we are going to study the first 3 stanzas. There are 7 in this first volume. The first 3 stanzas which describe the passing of the universe from a state of sleep, from a state of no manifestation, into the beginning of manifestation. So this is what the first 3 stanzas describe. Before we start with the stanzas themselves, there is in the Secret Doctrine a proem, which is a kind of introduction in which Madame Blavatsky explained certain principles that are necessary to understand the stanzas. Now, there are many interesting things in the proem. We don't have time to go through all of them. We are going to use only this first session to explore the proem. But we are going to focus our attention specifically on certain parts of the proem that will help us understand the first 3 stanzas that we are going to examine in this series. So in the proem there is a section of it in which Blavatsky explains 3 fundamental propositions of the esoteric philosophy. We are going to study today the first fundamental proposition, in which, as we are going to see, talk about the nature of the absolute reality and the nature of the manifested universe. So let us start with the first proposition. The Secret Doctrine establishes 3 fundamental propositions. The first one: an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle. So let us pause a little there. It is a good practice to meditate on this brief description. What the proem is going to explain is that the reality behind everything we see, behind all the variety of things that compose the manifested cosmos, the reality behind is a principle that is omnipresent, meaning it is everywhere. Every single thing that we perceive, or even those that we don't perceive but exist, they are all manifestations of this single principle, because this principle is omnipresent. This implies that this reality is both in what we regard as good and what we regard as bad. The theosophical view that is based on the esoteric philosophy does not accept the idea that there are 2 principles in the universe: a good principle that we can call God, and a bad principle in which God does not participate, that we can call a demon or devil or however we want to call it. So this reality is omnipresent everywhere. It is eternal. It is not affected by time. It is beyond the passing of time. It always was, it always will be. So there was no time in which this reality came into being. It has no beginning. It was always there. It is boundless. It's not subjected to any kind of limitation. And it is immutable. That is also an important principle. That this is immutable means that even though we see that in life everything changes, the ground of everything we perceive does not change. It is immutable. It is not affected. Now, if this is the reality of the cosmos, it is also the reality in ourselves. This is what we are, essentially, ultimately speaking. So we are this omnipresent, meaning not limited to this body, eternal, not affected by time, boundless, not restricted by any limitations, and immutable, let us call it consciousness, although it is not consciousness in the way that we understand it. This is what we are. And the process of the spiritual work implies a deepening of our perception so that we can get in touch with this reality, which is the same both in the universe and in human beings. So even though everything is changing, this reality never changes. How is that possible? Some examples are given which are just metaphors, but sometimes in Hindu literature, for example, you can see that it is said that the ultimate reality is like the gold, which can be shaped in many different ways, in a bracelet, in an earring, in a little statue. So the shapes change, the function of what you are shaping changes, the names change, but the gold is always the same, immutable. So this is basically the first fundamental proposition, the existence of this kind of reality, of course, both in the cosmos and in ourselves, because the reality is behind everything. And not only in ourselves, but also in the chair you are sitting on. Now, Blavatsky goes on saying that on this reality, all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought. In the words of the Mandukya Upanishad, which is a sacred literature from India, it is unthinkable and unspeakable. And this is also important to keep in mind, that all the efforts that we may make to explain, to put in concepts this reality, will result from this is only some kind of approximation to what this reality might be. But this kind of reality cannot be perceived by means of concepts or the mind. It can be perceived only when we raise our consciousness and we become this reality. So it's not something that we can understand. It's not something that we can see as if it were separate from ourselves. It is something that we can realize that we are. So even though Blavatsky makes efforts in the proem to explain what this reality is, all the efforts are limited. The result of this effort is limited. And if you see, most of this description that we have seen here is a negative description, negative in the sense of what the reality is not. Omnipresent means that it is not tied to a particular position in space. Eternal, it means that it is not subjected to the passing of time. Boundless, that it has no limits. Immutable, that it doesn't change. we don't know any of this. We know what a point in space is, we know what a point in time is, we know limitations, we know change, but these concepts are abstractions. So the way that this is being described is like the negation of what we at the level of the mind know. And this is a strategy that is used many times in sacred texts to describe that which is basically beyond description. So then she goes on and says, there is one absolute reality, which is this principle we were talking about, which antecedes, which is before, all manifested conditioned being. This infinite and eternal cause is the rootless root of all that was, is, and ever shall be. This phrase, rootless root, is frequently used in the secret doctrine. On this absolute reality, everything is rooted, but this reality is not rooted on anything higher. This is the source of everything. This is the container of everything. Now, it is absolute. We are going to explore what this means, but for the time being, we can say that it's not relative. Relative is something that admits description, that admits comparison, that is in relationship to other things. The absolute is beyond all this. So she says it is of course devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to manifested finite being. Why is it devoid of all attributes? Because only that which is relative and limited can have an attribute. For example, if we would say the absolute reality is red, that means that green, blue, yellow are all outside of the absolute reality. They are not contained in the absolute reality. If we say the absolute reality is good, that means that evil is outside the absolute reality. Therefore, it couldn't be absolute. Absolute means that everything is contained there. So the same, if we say that the absolute reality is love, then any manifestation of what we call hate should be something that is outside this absolute reality, and therefore this reality would not be absolute. So you see that this absolute reality is the container of everything. Maybe we can say it's like the zero. In the zero, you have contained potentially all the numbers. It's not that you, for example, you have +1 and -1, +2 and -2. The zero has the possibility for all the numbers, positive and negative. In itself is none of these numbers. So the absolute reality is neither love nor hate, it's neither blue nor red, but it contains the potentiality for all these conditioned manifestations that will appear in the course of the awakening of the cosmos. And it says that it's devoid of relation to manifested being, basically because, again, you can relate to something that is not you. So I am relating to another person because I am separate from another person. But since everything is this absolute reality, any finite being is the absolute reality itself. So we may think of having a relationship with God, for example, when we regard God as separate from us. So we pray to him, we ask him things, or her, however your idea of God is. Now, if everything that is manifested is God itself, then there is no possibility of relating to God as if it was something different. So this is why Blavatsky says this absolute reality is devoid of any relation to any conditioned being, because any conditioned being is a manifestation of this. So she says it's that she uses a neologism, a new word for this reality. She calls it beingness, because when we think of a being, again, we think of an individual entity which is definable. You say this is this particular being, and the rest is not this being. So the absolute reality is not really a being. It is the beingness. It is that reality that will allow the manifestations of all these different beings, entities, objects. So Blavatsky says it is beingness rather than being. It is what makes beings possible. And in Sanskrit, she compares with the idea of Sat. In Sanskrit, Sat is a word that means reality, it means truth. So they describe with the word Sat something similar to what Blavatsky is describing here. And she repeats, and is beyond all thought or speculation. Now, she insisted that this is beyond thought. So why should we study about this? Well, there are many reasons. We put our minds on this kind of descriptions, not because we hope to grasp the nature of the absolute by conceptual means, but because placing attention on this and using this in a meditative way, trying to look inside and trying to get closer and closer to this absolute reality, only in this way is how we are going to be able to perceive something of its nature. So the concepts are useful as a means, as a pointing finger that is pointing in the direction for us to search, for us to look. So even though this reality is beyond all concepts, to talk about this and to try to make an effort to understand at least what this is not is an important part of the spiritual path. And then we should try to go beyond all concepts. Now she says that this reality can be said to have two aspects. Actually, we can say that this reality has infinite aspects, because anything that is expressed in the manifested cosmos, it comes from this reality and therefore is an aspect of this reality. But she's focusing here on two aspects in particular. Later on in the Secret Doctrine, she brings up a third aspect because she's going to talk about certain principles that are fundamental in the manifestation of the universe. So she says this beingness is symbolized in the Secret Doctrine under two aspects. On one hand, absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. So the first aspect of the absolute is this absolute abstract space. Space has been used in Eastern traditions, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, as a way to describe that which is beyond descriptions. So, for example, if we take the regular space as we know it, we could say that anything we do within the space is not really affecting the space. Forget if you know about relativity, forget relativity for the time being. I'm going to explain a little about that later. But in our regular everyday activity and perception, for example, I can paint the walls of this room in a different color, but the space of the room is not affected. I can produce a smell in the room, but the space of the room is not affected by the smell, or only the air that is in this space. If I take all the air out of the space remains being the same and there will be no odor there. I can move things around, change the furniture, and the space is not affected. So in a similar way, whether there are universes manifesting or not, whether there is evolution going on or not, the absolute reality is like space that is not affected. We see, if we look at the sky, we see clouds going by, and the clouds may be white, the clouds may be black, but they cannot affect the sky. They come, they go, the sky remains immutable. So the space has been used in metaphysics, especially in Eastern metaphysics, as a metaphor for this reality. And Blavatsky says space is the single thing that we can neither exclude nor understand or conceive by itself. Try to think of something without the concept of space. It is impossible. It's like when we say a point, a mathematical point, is dimensionless. It doesn't occupy any space. Now, we cannot conceive that. It's just a concept. It's just a sentence. Because as soon as we think of a point, we think of a particular space there. Now, if you try to think what space is in itself, in its very nature, it also cannot be conceived. We realize the idea of space by means of the content that is within space, like my body and the space around myself, or the space that separates myself and the furniture. We never perceive space by itself. We only perceive the relative space that is between objects. So if there is absolutely no object, including ourselves in the universe, we could not perceive what space is. Blavatsky is not even talking about the physical space as being an aspect of the absolute. She's talking about an absolute abstract space, which is the source of the relative space that we experience. So this is one of the aspects of the absolute. The other aspect, she says, is absolute abstract motion, representing unconditioned consciousness. Even our Western thinkers have shown that consciousness is inconceivable to us apart from change, and motion best symbolizes change, its essential characteristic. This latter aspect of the one reality is also symbolized by the term the great breath, a symbol sufficiently graphic to need no further elucidation. So let's first see the second aspect of absolute abstract motion. So she says motion is an aspect of the absolute. And she says motion is the source of consciousness. We can see that we become aware of things by contrast. Like the typical example, does the fish know water? If water is constantly part of his environment, he may perceive a current of water when there is a motion in the water that makes that mass of water assume a certain different shape, different direction. But if the water is perfectly still, if there is no motion, no change, then the water could not be perceived. Same with us. If not for the changes, we could not perceive things. And you see, when there is a smell in the environment, which is constant, we soon lose awareness of that smell. Or if you leave your hand on the table perfectly still, with no motion, after a few minutes, you cannot perceive the table any longer. So consciousness, as we know it, is based on change, is based on motion. And Blavatsky says this motion, but not the relative motion that we know here, the motion of an object. There is an abstract, absolute motion that is part or an aspect of this ultimate reality. Now, we said that the absolute is immutable. If it is immutable, if it does not change, how can there be motion that is there part of the absolute? We need to ask all these questions if we are using the secret doctrine as a way to raise our minds beyond the limitations of the concrete, beyond the limitations of the lower mind. We need to ask ourselves all these questions. We need to try to really grasp, have a sense of what is being described. So how is it possible that something that is immutable, an aspect of it is this absolute abstract motion? I think, or how I see it, part of the solution to this logical contradiction is in the idea that this is absolute. When something becomes absolute, it becomes both opposites at the same time. For example, if we move our fingers, there is a certain rhythm in our fingers. And my finger is going to be here at this moment, here at this moment, here at this moment. Now, if we start accelerating this speed, and we accelerate this speed to its absolute value, that means that the finger will be in every point of space at every time. If we accelerate this to the absolute value, then the finger will be at every point of space at every time. This means that even though the finger is moving, it is also stationary. It is also immutable, not moving. So when we go to the point of the absolute reality, both polarities become one. And this is how now the process of manifestation comes when that absolute motion slows down, let's say, and becomes relative. Then we have a motion that can be perceived, that is not immutability any longer, and then the process of manifestation begins. This, however, doesn't imply that the absolute is changing. The absolute remains immutable, and this is where the concepts cannot really grasp the nature of the absolute. And then she says that this aspect of the absolute is called the great breath, because the effect of this absolute motion is like the breathing out of a universe. There is the process of evolution, and eventually there is a breathing in of the universe. The Theosophical view proposes a cyclic model of the universe. In the Theosophical view, the universe appears, evolves, and then comes back to its source and dissolves, and then appears again, evolves, and comes back to its source and dissolves. So this is like a breathing of the absolute reality. So she says, thus then, the first fundamental axiom of the secret doctrine is this metaphysical one absolute beingness, symbolized by finite intelligence as the theological Trinity. So you see that she mentioned three principles that are part of this absolute reality: the beingness, the absolute abstract motion, and the absolute abstract space. All these three are aspects in their absolute nature. So they are really one. But when beingness becomes beings, then each being is a relative manifestation of the absolute beingness. Then when the absolute space becomes relative, we have all the different planes in nature, all the different dimensions of space in nature. Then when the absolute abstract motion becomes relative motion, we have all different kinds not only of motion but also of consciousness. So it is from this absolute Trinity, which is one, that Blavatsky says all the relative trinities for the deities of all religions come. Now, this was a description of the absolute reality in itself. Now, when the cosmos, which was resting, dissolved, merged in this absolute reality, when that cosmos begins to awaken, the first thing that happens is a differentiation in this absolute reality, which is called in the poem a pre-cosmic differentiation. If you were looking at the cosmos, you cannot perceive any change. This is happening before the cosmos appears, before the cosmos manifests. This is why it's called pre-cosmic. So she says, considering this metaphysical triad as the root from which proceeds all manifestation, the great breath, this absolute motion, assumes the character of pre-cosmic ideation. So you see how she relates motion with intelligence, motion with consciousness. So this absolute motion, which is unmanifested, the first thing that happens when the universe begins to awaken is that that great breath becomes a kind of intelligence, a kind of ideation, but it's still pre-cosmic, it's still non-manifested. And she says, it is the fons et origo, the source and origin of force and of all individual consciousness, and supplies the guiding intelligence in the vast scheme of cosmic evolution. So this motion becomes a kind of universal wisdom of cosmic ideation, pre-cosmic in this at this stage. Is still very abstract. It's not an entity. It's not a group of entities. This is the seed for the intelligence that expresses in nature. Intelligence expressing itself through angels, through the instinct in animals, through the laws of nature, through the human mind. The principle of intelligence is beginning to differentiate in this pre-cosmic stage. And the intelligence behind the process of evolution comes from this aspect of the absolute. Then she says, on the other hand, the pre-cosmic root substance, Mula Prakriti, is the aspect of the absolute which underlies all objective planes of nature. So Mula Prakriti is a Sanskrit word that means the root of nature, basically. And this is a term that Blavatsky uses for the absolute abstract space. So the great breath becomes the pre-cosmic ideation. The absolute abstract space becomes the pre-cosmic root substance. This is the seed from which all different kinds of matter, and by that I don't mean only the physical matter, but also astral matter and mental and Buddhic, all the different planes in nature. This is the seed from which everything comes. So we have this absolute triad, and we have the manifestation of these two aspects that Blavatsky is describing. Consciousness comes from the absolute motion. Matter comes from the absolute space. So she says, just as pre-cosmic ideation is the root of all individual consciousness, so pre-cosmic substance is the substratum of matter in the various degrees of its differentiation. So if we look at this diagram, we have first this trinity that is one, this absolute trinity, with Venus, the absolute motion, the absolute space. Now from the absolute motion comes the pre-cosmic ideation. Sometimes this is called the unmanifested logos. You will see in the secret doctrine the use of this word, logos, which is a Greek word, which means intelligence. It also means the word. It means order or pattern, the intelligence that is behind the creation of patterns. So because this is pre-cosmic, this is really before the cosmos appears, it is said that this logos, this ideation, is unmanifested. And once it goes through the line of manifestation, in diagrammatically speaking, then this will become what we know in nature as force and what we know as individual consciousness. From the other aspect, the absolute abstract space, comes the pre-cosmic substance, the seed, the source of matter, which is called Mula Prakriti. And this, as we said, on the manifested side, is going to give rise to matter and all the planes of nature, which in the theosophical view, matter is space. Space is not an empty, space in itself, as we saw, is an absolute principle. When we talk about the three dimensions of space, Blavatsky explains, it's not really dimensions of space. Space is dimensionless. It has no dimensions. What has three dimensions in space is the physical matter. The fourth dimension is not, again, a dimension of space, but the astral matter has four dimensions. So in her view, space is the container of what we call matter on different planes. So on one side we have motion and consciousness, on the other side we have space and matter. Now, from this pre-cosmic differentiation, it is not really a duality. It's when this beginning of differentiation happens, there is no real separation between motion and between matter, for example. How can we visualize that? Well, perhaps you can say that or think that suppose that there is water that is perfectly still, perfectly transparent, with no dust at all in the water. That water would be like the pre-cosmic substance. No motion, no a single drop of water is moving. There is no single, speck of dust. There is no light that is refracting. So you have this perfectly still water, which would be impossible to see. So this is like the invisible, the unmanifested pre-cosmic substance. Now, if you start rotating that water, if you put some motion in the water, we are now bringing in the second aspect, the absolute motion. So the aspect of pre-cosmic motion at this stage. If you start moving the water and forming a kind of eddy in the water, you will see how an entity appears. The eddy now appears. Now you can see it as separate from the water around. Of course, it is not separate, it is just water. But because by virtue of the movement, that aspect of the water becomes like an entity. So if not for the presence of both things, of the water and the motion, if not for the presence of both, there would be no entities or no eddies in the water. In the metaphor that represents no entities in the universe or objects. So both motion and water, they are both latent as possibilities in the pre-cosmic state. Now, when the motion begins to actually work and the water begins to be shaped by that motion, we come into the manifested universe, and you can talk about motion and water as being two different things, although they are intrinsically connected. You cannot really separate them. If you separate the motion from the water, you fall back into non-manifestation. To manifest the eddy, you need both. So this is what happens in the universe. The next stage of manifestation implies a duality, implies the working together of these two aspects. So Blavatsky explains, Parabrahm, which is a Sanskrit word that is used in Vedanta for this absolute reality that we are discussing. The one reality, the absolute, is that essence which is out of all relation to conditioned existence. We already discussed this. But once we pass in thought, in our thinking about this, in our reasoning, once we pass in thought from this to us absolute negation, remember that we said that the absolute is described in negative terms, it's not conditioned, it's not limited. But once we go beyond this and enter into the field of relative manifestation, duality supervenes in the contrast of spirit or consciousness and matter, subject and object. So the motion gives rise to what we call spirit, the space gives rise to what we call matter. So you see that spirit and matter are both equal co-eternal principles. It's not that spirit is higher than matter or that the spirit creates matter. In the theosophical view, both spirit and matter are natural manifestations of this absolute reality that is the synthesis of both. So spirit or consciousness and matter are, however, to be regarded not as independent realities, but as the two facets or aspects of the absolute, Parabrahm, which constitute the basis of conditioned being, whether subjective or objective. So this is what I was referring to in the example of the eddy. Even though in theory, conceptually, you can talk about motion as being different from water, in the actual manifestation of the eddy, they both are interdependent. If there is no water, the motion cannot manifest because there is nothing to be moved. If there is no motion, then water remains as an abstract principle. There is no eddy that can be manifested. So both principles are interrelated and they depend on each other. So the contrast of these two aspects of the absolute is essential to the existence of the manifested universe. Apart from cosmic substance, cosmic ideation could not manifest as individual consciousness, since it is only through a vehicle of matter that the universal consciousness wells up as the feeling of I am I. A physical basis is necessary to focus a ray of the universal mind at a certain stage of complexity. So here she's saying, repeating this idea that the two principles depend on each other to manifest. If we separate them, they both fall back into the unmanifested potentiality. And then she says, there is the universal mind. Now, to generate the sense of I am I, to generate the sense of self-consciousness, that universal mind, which is a unity, which is omnipresent, needs to be focused on a particular bundle of matter. When the universal mind works through my brain, it gives the idea I am I. When the same universal mind works through your brain, it gives you the idea I am I. So it is the matter that composes our organisms which becomes the vehicle of the one universal mind and produces the individual consciousness. So this individual consciousness is the result of the principle of unity, which is this intelligence, and the principle of separation, which is matter. And the interaction of both produces what we call individual consciousness. So again, she says, apart from cosmic ideation, see that she is now using cosmic, not pre-cosmic. So we are talking about now we had the absolute, then we had the pre-cosmic differentiation in which they are still one, they are still not manifested as different, but this is the preparation for the manifestation of these two principles as being different, although never separate. And then now we have the third stage, that of cosmic ideation and cosmic substance, in which these two principles appear as being different and always interrelated. So apart from cosmic ideation, from the intelligence behind the cosmos, cosmic substance, the root of matter in the cosmos, would remain an empty abstraction, and no emergence of consciousness could ensue. This is again what we have been explaining, that the two of them are necessary for manifestation, otherwise they become separate, they become just possibilities. And then she says, the manifested universe, therefore, is pervaded by duality, which is, as it were, the very essence of its existence as manifestation. She puts this existence because from the Latin word, existence means something that came out of, to the front, something that manifested, that appeared. So what she says is the reality behind everything is a unity. But as soon as you fall into the field of manifestation, duality is at the basis of everything. So in our spiritual life, and this happens on each plane, there is a relative unity for each plane, and there is this relative duality for each plane. So we can raise our consciousness from plane to plane, searching for the region of unity within that particular plane. The region of unity is the reflection of the absolute reality. The region of duality is the reflection of the manifested reality. Now, once we have these two principles, consciousness and matter, there is a triplicity that appears. She says, but just as the opposite poles of subject and object, spirit and matter, are but aspects of the one unity in which they are synthesized, so in the manifested universe there is that which links spirit to matter, subject to object. This something, at present unknown to Western speculation, is called by the occultist Fohat. This problem of how do spirit and matter relate is a problem in Western philosophy that probably we became more aware of with Descartes. Descartes, this French philosopher, said that mind is an immaterial principle, completely different from matter. Matter was, of course, a material principle, and the mind was a separate immaterial principle. So he generated this duality. Now, the problem that this produced, philosophically speaking, is how can an immaterial principle, which is mind, affect something that is material? It is like, they would say, a ghost trying to drive a machine. If the ghost is immaterial, it cannot touch the machine. You know, there is this old movie Ghosts where a dead person was trying to communicate with the physical plane, and he couldn't because he couldn't touch or influence the physical things. So that is the idea. How can something that is immaterial, like the spirit, influence matter, which is objective and material? Well, in the theosophical view, since spirit and matter are not two independent principles, since they are two aspects of a single reality, they are always in touch. Now, this interaction, the interaction between spirit and matter, is what in the esoteric philosophy is called Fohat. And Blavatsky now will explain what this Fohat is. So Fohat is a word that we don't know where it comes from. Blavatsky says that it comes from the Tibetan, but as far as we know, it doesn't. It may be a word that her Tibetan adept teachers were using from the language that it seems that they use, that is called Zenzar. But whatever the case, this Fohat is the idea of the link that brings together, that allows mind to have an effect over matter. And she says, Fohat is the bridge by which the ideas that exist in the divine thought, you know, we have this cosmic ideation that has ideas. Again, see that all this is in quotation marks. When communicating to human beings, we have to use the words and realities that we human beings know. So we talk about divine thought because we know thinking. We talk about ideas because we know ideas. But we have to try to make this as abstract as possible. It's not that the cosmic ideation is a big mind thinking. This is a typical mistake that we make when thinking of gods. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, we normally conceive God as being subject to the same things that we are: jealousy, anger, love. He prefers some people over others. So we normally project our own limitations or our own nature onto the spiritual realm. In theosophy, we have to be very careful not to do this. But when communicating, how we communicate it in any other way? If we just bring up a word that we cannot relate to in any way, then there is no communication. So take all this allegorically, and part of the work of the student is to meditate on these concepts, to see how abstract your conception can become, how universal, how abstract, how far beyond your own limitations your perception can raise. So the idea is that in this cosmic ideation is the intelligence, the laws that rule the universe, that rule evolution, the intelligence that is guiding all this. And she says that it is through Fohat, which she will describe as cosmic energy, it is through Fohat that the ideas that are potentially there in the cosmic ideation are impressed in the cosmic substance. So let's read what she says. Fohat is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed on cosmic substance as the laws of nature. So the laws of nature are the result of the activity of Fohat, and Fohat is like the messenger. Fohat is like this agent that impresses the ideas that are in the cosmic ideation onto matter and shapes. It's in our case, it's like we have an idea. If we are an artist, we have an idea of what we want to produce, and we have the matter that we are going to use to produce that idea. And Fohat is like the body, the hands that will bring those ideas, which are immaterial, abstract, into a physical manifestation, which will be the artwork. So Fohat is the active power in the universe. Then she says, Fohat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation. Or regarded from the other side, it is the intelligent medium, the guiding power of all manifestation, the thought divine, transmitted and made manifest through the Dhyan Chohans, the architects of the visible world. In the secret doctrine, the Dhyan Chohans is a word used for the hierarchy of celestial beings, called devas in Eastern philosophy, or angels in the Judeo-Christian tradition, etc. So all the universe is fashioned, is built through these cosmic intelligences, these celestial beings, and they are the vehicles for this Fohat. They are both being guided, and at the same time they channel, so to say, this cosmic energy, intelligent cosmic energy that is Fohat. So here we have that this cosmic ideation that is now the manifested logos. Remember, the pre-cosmic was the unmanifested logos. Now this cosmic ideation is that intelligence that is manifested. Through Fohat, it can shape the cosmic substance, which many times is called Akasha in the secret doctrine. So Akasha is a word from the Sanskrit, which means space, and it's in Hinduism is the highest principle or material principle that is manifested in the universe. So she says, thus from spirit or cosmic ideation comes our consciousness. We already saw that. From cosmic substance come the several vehicles in which that consciousness is individualized and attains to a self-reflective consciousness. So we have from cosmic ideation consciousness, from cosmic substance are different bodies that we saw make that universal consciousness into an individual consciousness. While Fohat, she goes on, in its various manifestations, is the mysterious link between mind and matter, the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. So when Blavatsky describes Fohat, many times she calls it cosmic electricity, because this Fohat manifests on the physical plane as electricity and magnetism. On all the other planes it manifests in different ways. But you see, even in a human being, when we have an idea in the mind, how can the idea, which is immaterial, suppose that I want to move my hand, how is this passage from the mere idea, I want to move the hand, how does that idea affect the matter of the hand? What science discovered is that somehow these changes of consciousness produce an electric activity in our nerves that induce the matter of our hand to move. So we see this triplicity in ourselves. The abstract idea, I want to lift my hand, the electrical impulse that is generated by the neurons, and the act of raising the hand. So you see how this electric activity is a manifestation on the physical plane of Fohat. My idea of raising the hand is a manifestation of the cosmic ideation acting through my particular brain. And then my physical body, raising the hand, is a manifestation of the cosmic substance, which on the physical plane becomes the physical atoms that compose our body. So if we want to summarize what we have seen so far, we can say that there is an ever-existing nature, principle, this beingness, this absolute reality is ever-existing. It doesn't begin and end. Then we have a pre-existing principle when the universe is going to manifest. Pre-existing, Blavatsky uses this word because it exists previously to the manifestation of the universe. Now this pre-cosmic stage is not eternal. It begins at one point in time, it ends at another point in time. Even the idea of time at this level is not quite correct. You know, time as we know it begins with manifestation. But for us to grasp a little the idea, the pre-cosmic ideation, the unmanifested logos, begins to activate and become the manifested logos at certain point in time. Blavatsky talks about this in the book of Xian talks about this in the Secret Doctrine as a vibration, the last vibration of the seventh eternity. While the universe is in a state of rest, as we are going to see in the stanzas, there is this absolute abstract motion, this vibration. The last vibration at the end of this period of rest begins to produce certain changes that end up with the manifestation of the universe. The beginning of that last vibration is this unmanifested logos. The end of that last vibration is the manifested logos. So there is a transformation from the unmanifested to the manifested. But that last vibration appears in time, so to say, and disappears. So it's not eternal in the sense of ever existing. So we can say that the unmanifested logos appears for this particular universe and will disappear when this universe is dissolved. So we have in the pre-existing nature, the pre-cosmic ideation and manifested logos, and the pre-cosmic substance, mula prakriti, as we have talked about. Then we come into the phenomenal. Phenomena means that which can be perceived. So the manifested universe, in which this unmanifested logos now becomes manifested and expresses itself as cosmic ideation, which will give rise to all force and individual consciousness. At the same time, this pre-cosmic substance will become the cosmic substance, akasha, which will give rise to all different kinds of matters and all the planes in nature. And then we have Fohat, this cosmic energy, that is the bridge between the two. That is what will allow them to interact. So this is more or less the diagram that represents what Blavatsky is explaining in the proem of the Secret Doctrine. And she gives a summary. The following summary will afford a clearer idea to the reader. First, we have the Absolute, the Parabrahm of the Vedantins, or the one reality, Sat, which is both absolute being and non-being. Remember, both opposites are synthesized in the Absolute. Then we have the first manifestation, which probably could be more accurate to say the first differentiation, the impersonal and in philosophy unmanifested logos, the precursor of the manifested. So this is a pre-cosmic ideation. Then we have, as third there, we have spirit matter, life, the Purusha and Prakriti, or the second logos. We will see, although Blavatsky didn't, this is like the duality before the triplicity. The second logos is normally that state in which there is a duality, which is not really separate, but there is a duality there. When you separate that duality, then Fohat appears to keep the connection between the two. So the second logos is many times seen as this duality, which as soon as it appears, then you turn into a triplicity. So in many accounts, the second logos is ignored because it's a kind of a bridge between the first or unmanifested and the third or manifested logos. So Blavatsky sometimes doesn't even talk about the second logos. It seems to be more of a philosophical concept than a reality, although it is a reality too, as we are going to see later. But it's like as soon as you have a duality, that duality separates and then you have the triplicity. So the triplicity involves the third logos, the cosmic ideation, and of course the cosmic matter associated with it. Mahat, or intelligence. Mahat is a Sanskrit word for the universal mind. The universal world soul, the cosmic noumenon, which means the cosmic cause of matter. So she's talking about the cosmic ideation and the universal soul as being the cosmic substance, which is the cause of matter, the basis of the intelligent operations in and of nature, also called Mahabuddhi in Hinduism. You don't need to concern too much with that. So this is like a summary of the three things that we have said. We can stop here for today and we can discuss other things. In our next class, we are going to start with the first stanza, or we are not going to complete the first stanza in our next class, but we will work on the first slokas. The word sloka means verse in Sanskrit. So the first slokas in this first stanza, which will describe the condition of the universe before the awakening, before the manifestation, even before the differentiation of the universe. So, before the pre-cosmic ideation appears. So this is what we are going to discuss in our next class. Thank you for participating, and I'll see you next week.